Hello there, Dr. Jan here, otherwise known as the Brain Coach, with some insight from a neurodevelopmental perspective about sensory challenges. So that's a really big word, neurodevelopment, but if you break it down, it's really not hard to understand. Neuro having to do with the brain, and then development. How do those different aspects of the brain develop to cause good function? There are different types of sensory issues. One is touch. You might just say to your child, "It's just a sock," and they're having a major production over it because their tactile or touch system is a problem. Let's delve into this and see where the foundation is and what needs to happen. Tactility is foundational to the central nervous system. What we mean by that is much of the stimulation that comes to an infant does come through this channel of tactility. Especially important is the tummy time, being on the stomach. As the child is moving, when they're on their stomach, they actually get input from their environment, where they're feeling hot and cold and warm and smooth and rough, and they can get an idea of where they are in space based on that. You know, when they move their arm, it sends a signal. This is my arm. So you get that brain-body connection. But if there's glitches in this, where maybe the child is on their back all the time, and they're not getting the kind of information that they need to their brain to start organizing the central nervous system, it can cause glitches, like there could be problems with coordination. Language and articulation can be affected, especially fine motor development is hindered by not having these good connections, and even taste and textures can be a problem. Now there's several different aspects of tactility. One is the deep sense of pain. So if you have a high tolerance for deep pain, you might be too rough with your classmates and not even realize it because you don't feel pain appropriately, and so you're too rough to get to your point of pain. You might notice that a child with a high sense of pain gets hurt and they don't even know where they were hurt. Or they just get into other people's social space because they don't have that boundary. Another aspect of tactility is our gnostic response. That's our light touch. And if the topical touch is very sensitive, there's a lot of negative things that can come from that. They may not like to be touched and jerk away from people that are really trying to be nice to them. They could be too ticklish, overreact to just light pain. Their clothes often bother them, so they're just uncomfortable all the time or want to take their clothes off. They have to stop and adjust their socks oftentimes just because it's just bugging them. It's like overload to their sensory system that just makes them very uncomfortable. And they interpret that light touch as pain, where you wouldn't think it would be hurtful at all, but they're getting the wrong messages to their brain, and it does feel like pain. Another aspect of tactility is the trigeminal, or the temperature. The trigeminal nerve is one of the largest nerves of the body. It controls the face and the head. So the eyes, the nose, the lips, the mouth, all of this area has to do with tactility. And if they have hypersensitivity here, they could be really troubled with haircuts. Or not have a good sense of temperature. They want everything really hot, or they want it lukewarm and nothing in between. If this area is hypersensitive, they could be really picky eaters because they don't like the texture. Or they might not want to wear their glasses because it just feels yucky on their head. Also, if this is an issue, they might not even be aware that there's food on their face, so that can be very socially awkward as well. When tactility or temperature is an issue, the brain is just not even recognizing that, oh, it's cold outside, I need to wear a jacket. Or that my shower is too hot or too cold. Another area that can really be distracting for children and adults that in this tactile realm is the olfactory. So if you are overly sensitive to odors, just imagine every place you go, your attention is drawn off in one way or the other because of the smell. Or maybe you have functional problems, like you can't even go into a public restroom because of the smell. Proprioception is a term that's used in relationship to tactility, and it basically means where you are in space. So if you don't have good proprioception, if you don't have good feedback to your brain, then you don't know where you are in space, and you often bump into people, get into their social space. There's also spillage of information going from one side of the body to the other. So for instance, if you wanted to write with your right hand, but you had this spillage issue, you might be pushing with your left hand or raising your shoulder or moving your head to the side just to get that done, because the pathway straight to your hand is not mature enough to just move your hand. That covers a lot of the issues tactily that we see where children are having struggles, but there's also visual and auditory challenges as well. If a child has poor central detail vision, that means the development just did not happen well right in the center. Then a child tends to be hyperperipheral. That means they see too much on the outskirts and not enough in the middle. This can cause a number of different negative behaviors. One would be skipping lines when reading. You can see how that would be a real problem, or skipping little words and leaving them out altogether. It can also have to do with reading issues where they only see parts of the words, so that's all they're sounding out. A real negative thing, especially in a classroom environment, is that they're distracted by every movement. So anybody moves and their eyes catch it, and they move toward that and get distracted. In an extreme, some children want to watch things spin or dangle strings or flap their hands to stimulate this peripheral vision, which is not a good thing. They often can get too close to the TV too, just so that they are really stimulating their peripheral. Now, if we move on to the auditory, you might just say, stop overreacting when your child is upset about something where there's a noisy environment. We think it's not too loud, but if a child is hypersensitive, they might just cover their ears anytime there's any kind of noise, like a vacuum or a blender. They might not be able to be in a gym or in a church because it's just too loud. This is what we refer to as auditory sensory overload. It's just kind of like having a migraine headache and somebody banging and then wanting you to do your schoolwork. It's just maddening. That overload to the central nervous system is just all that they can pay attention to. Unfortunately, all of these hypersensitivities are registered in the brain as pain, and they can cause unusual things like inappropriate reactions. Some of those we've already mentioned. There may be atypical fears like not wanting to go into a public restroom because of those hand dryers, something like that. They could be light sleepers because of this, and then little noises of the house just seem exaggerated. It also could cause them to want to avoid crowds or even being around other people. We've seen some parents go, I don't know how their hearing could be hyper because half the time they don't act like they can even hear. Well, one of the things that the brain does is always try to protect. So they could actually turn off their auditory system just to be able to cope with life. When the auditory system is not giving good information, they might have what we call tonal processing. And that's where the ear hears correctly, but the brain is not interpreting it correctly. They often have difficulties in groups or misunderstand in conversation and do unusual things, like they might just be defiant and say, what do you mean a purple cow's on the roof? and you didn't say that at all. And they insist that that's what you said because that's what they heard. And so it can be a very confusing world for the child. Some children compensate for this with silly behavior. So they do all kinds of silly things to get the information they need because they didn't really understand what you're saying. And some just say, huh? Huh? Because they just didn't get it. If a parent finds itself in this situation, oftentimes they just want to know, what can we do? How can we help the situation? Well, at Brain Sprints, we help you find the glitches. So we do in-person evaluations, we do video evaluations, and give you in-home programs to do. These in-home solutions can be done after school or as part of a homeschool regime. Now, if you're not close to where our evaluation site is or travel is a problem, that's not a concern because we have in-home distance programs where we are able to work with the family at a distance because we know the symptoms and what causes those symptoms to happen. What we do is help you address the root cause, and as the brain pathways are built, the function gets better. That's the good news. We also encourage these type of programs because sometimes it's not just the sensory system that's the problem, it's the whole foundation needs some help, and that sensory is just a piece of the puzzle. So if you would like to get a free consult, we have those. You just go to brainsprints.com and you can sign up for that. We would be honored to help you find some solutions to these sensory issues that are causing your child to have such a struggle in life.